I need to share screen. So where is this? Share screen. This one. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, let me start.
Is she close enough to the melted rock?
Yes, I think that's safe to be so close.
A
Okay,
bit dangerous.
I'm going to show you a little video first and then we'll have a discussion.
Hello, good morning. I've got to say, following someone who was really honing in on my fear of public speaking was not really how I wanted to do this, but all right, one more. All right. Well, today what I want to talk about is essentially what makes us who we are. Why are we different than other animals? Are we? And how did we get this way? Now, for the last couple decades, a couple folks, in particular a guy named Richard Wrangham from Harvard, have been proposing that what really makes us who we are is that we eat cooked food, which sounds a little quick and trite, but he has now written a book and a great many papers and worked with grad students. And he's got a really strong body of evidence that what makes us different than other apes and many of our ancestors is that we had access to cooked food and all the extra calories that makes available, and it freed up energy for our great big brains, which are a great big part of many of the other things people would point out about our languages and our cultures and many things that make us special. And he argues that it's that cooked food that was the link that let this all get going. Now, we have a lot of physical adaptations that he would argue that are linked to having access to cooked food and fire. We're not just like the rest of the apes on the planet now. We're not just like a lot of the ones that have come before us in the last 5, 6 million years. Particularly, we have very small teeth, very small jaw muscles. We can't chew all day. Most other apes do. Gorillas, chimpanzees chew for hours, 12, 14 hours a day. We can't do that. If we have to live on raw food, we lose weight. It's a great diet. In fact, if you go on the raw food diet, you'd be in trouble probably without access to airplanes to move food around, without oil presses, without an almond industry in California. It's rough. In fact, the raw food diet does have side effects for some women. It actually eliminates reproduction, which is not a great evolutionary adaptation. So Wrangham may be onto something in this argument about the raw food. He talks about other adaptations besides just our teeth and jaws and our brain size. And some people talk about adaptations such as our tool use and our bipedalism. And over the last 4, 5, 6 million years, there are quite a few folks back there in our family tree. There are arguably a dozen or 2 dozen different hominin species coming through to finally end up in us. And these species tend to be smaller, have much smaller skulls, much smaller brains. And for example, over here on the side, sagittal crests. What makes a gorilla look kind of like the mohawk thing that's going on there is a big bone across the top of their skull, and that's where the big jaw muscles attach that let them chew for 12 or 14 hours a day. We don't have that crest. That's why we don't look like Klingons, right? So we don't have the jaw muscles that are going to let us do that kind of all-day work. Now, this all seemed to have changed pretty quickly. I mean, there's a lot of adaptations happening to Lucy and different species before us, but somewhere around 2 million years ago, things really changed. Australopithecus gets loose in Bellingham, runs in here. That creates a bit of an emergency. We have an animal in the room. You know, there's no faking it for him. He's coming in, and you're like, oh, the thing. Somewhere around 2 million years ago, Homo erectus shows up in Africa. Homo erectus shows up here, perhaps with a nudity issue, but you would be thinking, dude, get some clothes on, or something along those lines. More or less recognizable as us. In a short period of time, a couple 100,000 years, brain size has essentially doubled from the size of a fist to 2 fists. Wrangham and others argue that's because of all of the extra calories available from cooked food. The brain is a hugely energy-hungry thing. It needs a lot of energy. Now, the way we have traditionally viewed our evolutionary processes here are that all these different adaptations have been taking place through millions of years. Bipedalism, useful for moving fuels around, small teeth for quite some time, unable to do some of the chewing the other apes do. The arrival of tools, the arrival of our big brains, all this stuff is taking place. And until fairly recently, we thought all this happened, and then somewhere around 500,000 years ago, thank goodness we started having fire. So in that last time period there, what you have to believe is that there were big-brained animals with jaws that couldn't chew the food all day, somehow getting by without airplanes and oil presses and almond orchards. Now, Wrangham would argue there's plenty of evidence that fire was going back at least 2 million years. It's our bodies. It's the teeth. It's the jaw muscles. It's the short intestines. It's the way we need cooked food. Now, in the last couple years, literally, we've been seeing more and more evidence of fire further and further back in the record. Getting closer, interestingly, to that 2 million year point. We've seen evidence now in South Africa of fire probably being used by ancestors, perhaps, up to like 1.7 million years. So we're starting to see this idea that perhaps we were living in the presence of fire for a much longer time than we thought. Now, this still raises some interesting chicken and egg puzzles. Now, for example, bipedalism evolved quite some time ago. Now, I've got to say, it's a very useful feature for moving fuels around. If you want to make a fire, standing on 2 feet is a great thing, moving fuels around. But just moving fuels, if I move a big wet branch like that and set it on a fire, it's going to just go out, right? You need intellectual capability to understand dry fuels. And moving fuels around is tricky for anything bigger than a stick. You need tools to break up fuels. You need something that'll break up wood into smaller pieces. I've spent a lot of time in the Forest Service fighting fires, and we spent a lot of nights on fires trying to stay warm. And I'll tell you, nothing comes in as handy as a chainsaw to make a bunch of big fires to sleep around when it's raining at night. And it rains on fires, I promise you that. Interestingly enough, we, our ancestors, have had stone tools for around 1.7, maybe more million years. And one of the interesting features of these tools is they're really big. Here's the size of it. I have a big hand, pointed out again to me today. It's just somewhat of a mystery. People argue about what the heck did our ancestors use axes for? Since there wasn't fire until 500,000 years ago, they must have been really doing a job on those mammoths or something. I would argue that even just the name, we call them axes. We look at that and we know what the tool is. Now, all of these things require mental capabilities. Making a fire. Hands up, who has ever made a fire just with sticks they found in the woods, without matches, without a bow? I'm waiting for the hands down because you used the bow. All right. Out of 1,000 people, I got about 7. It's very tricky. I am not in that club. This is a failed attempt, by the way. Lots of trying on a hearth with dry kindling, lots of videos, lots of lessons, dried tinder. This is technology. You know, many different people have arguments one way or another, but this is the technology. All of the rest are impossible without fire. Go make a chip for your computer without making something hot, I dare you. And it's hard to do. It's a technology. It requires thinking. It requires language. It requires communication. It requires culture over probably centuries of sharing this information until whole groups of our ancestors were able to make fire. So here's the chicken and egg problem. If eating cooked food is what allowed our brains to double in size, if eating cooked food and having access to extra energy and heat is what made us evolve, literally, into who we are today, then how the heck did we have access to the fire before we had the brains to do the clever stick tricks and stuff like that, before we had language and culture to tell our children, hey, check out this trick with the stick we can do? It's a real puzzle, and that's actually one of the criticisms of Wrangham's work is there probably wasn't just enough random fire on the landscape, like, hey, it's Africa, let's go over here, hey, there's another fire, let's evolve here for a couple million years, hey, there's another one. I've worked around fire. Fire is tricky to keep going. Fire is tricky to manage. It requires a lot of work. It requires moving fuels around. So just like going out and trimming branches off with that axe tool would be really useful for knocking off branches. If you think back to all the diagrams of our family tree you've seen, we're one last little branch up top, and a dozen, 2 dozen, maybe different species have been chopped off on this tree, coming along and evolved to us. And in this environment, mostly we're talking about in Africa, there were variables and factors that led to us and selected out many other alternative species. Now think about that family tree and think about what you know about evolution. Here's the classic example, Darwin's finches. Darwin's on the Beagle, he heads to these islands and he notices, wow, there's finches on all these islands. But they sure look different. Some have big beaks for breaking up seeds, others have little beaks. What's going on? Now Darwin, not being a geographer, took way too long to take a look at where the finches were from on each island. But the key here is islands. Evolution doesn't happen really great in billions of individuals spread over whole planets. It works really well in isolated pockets, where just a few individuals that might have a particular advantage get to reproduce more, get to change over time, multi-generations. So islands are a big factor in how evolution occurs. And Darwin finally figured that out, and all that's a whole other set of stories. However, in Africa, we had islands. The part of Africa, the cradle of life, the Great Rift Valley is where we think life was going on in a way that somehow led to us. Now, what is a rift valley? A rift valley is where continental plates are spreading apart, lava's coming up, and unlike the lava flows in Hawaii today, this lava is pouring into internal valleys, miles, tens of miles wide. It has nowhere else to go. It's not going to dump into the ocean. So for thousands, tens of thousands, arguably hundreds of thousands of years in the Great Rift Valley, there were giant lava flows that would have had front edges, warm spots, hot spots that you could go. Now, some people will always tell me, you can't get close to that stuff. Well, no, you can. And we've all been watching in Hawaii as people are getting close and enjoying the pleasures of living near lava. Now, these lava flows in our Africa were immense, and there were islands all over the place for millions of years. I've been working with graduate students and undergrads for years, making maps now, trying to get my head around where these lava flows were occurring and when. I've also been having the grad students and undergrads try to figure out where all of our ancestors were, and we have very little evidence. We have dozens, not hundreds of digs where we've identified Australopithecine and Ardipithecine, all these different species. I'll let that map sink in a minute. The Great Rift Valley of Africa is where all that lava has been flowing into in huge flows. And hey, look, that's where most of our evolutionary story plays out for millions of years. There's a few other down in South Africa. There's a couple spots over here, but this is where we're talking about. And the students and I have been working to zoom in and look at different eras, particularly this 2 million year ago point where our brains double in size. What was going on? Where were the lava flows? Now, this is just a beginning element of research at this point, but what we've been finding is pretty exciting stuff. Most of these ancestors of ours were living close, not necessarily right at lava flows, and had exposure to these what I would call islands in the pyrosphere. For tens of thousands, maybe longer of years, there would be front edges in these huge lava flows in which a small group could live and get used to eating cooked food, get used to not needing fur, get used to needing 2 feet and a hand to bring wood maybe back to their campfires that were on the front edges of this lava, creating a situation in which they'd have access to the food to allow their brains to continue to develop to where we are today. Once again, the parts around the Olduvai Gorge, parts up in Kenya and Ethiopia, have this remarkable coincidence in space. I'm a geographer. What I think is, why there? What was going on there? And this is what I see going on there. There are some things happening in the same places in the same time that are worth thinking about. And we're going to keep working on this research here in the near future. What I want you to take away from this is this one big idea. We are the fire species. We're the only species on Earth that makes fire. We're the only one I've seen that's good at controlling it. I mean, you train a dog to run with a burning stick, but I bet you, actually you probably can't. That's tricky. So we have evolved, but we've also co-evolved with the fire we take to the planet. And in this time when we're thinking about climate change and our effect on the globe and our effect on the landscape, it can be very useful to embrace this idea. We are the fire animal. This is what we bring to the planet. This is what we bring to the climate. is our interests in fire that are millions of years old. And we're committed. We have to wear clothes. We have to have metal. We have to have all these tools. And we are burning the heck out of everything we touch. We bring fire everywhere we go. And I think that can be a useful starting point when you think about problems like climate change, development, deforestation. Remember, you are a fire animal. Thank you.
Okay, we can now stop the share and then go into discussion. So the issue here is that we have big brain. Our big brain obviously needs a lot of fuel, so we need cooking. But cooking means we need to be able to control fire, and control fire is tricky. So this is the chicken and egg problem. So in the last video, it showed that actually it is possible to find areas where there is a constant source of heat for you to cook. There's lava. And therefore, people living around the area or animals living around the area may have access to cooked meat or cooked food. And that's how we get our brain larger and larger. So this is a hypothesis. And obviously, this hypothesis is being studied at the moment. And eventually, I hope we can get more evidence showing that it's true. So, comments?
Albert, I'm very glad that you talked about controlling fire. At the beginning of that video, I was very, very frustrated because he was always talking about us inventing fire about 500,000 years ago. There's always been fire, but what happened 500,000 years ago, pardon me, was that we learned to control it and utilize it. But yeah, he didn't make that clear at the beginning.
Yeah, but his point is that it is very difficult to control fire.
Oh, sure.
And very difficult to make fire. That means start a fire from scratch. So suppose you are in a lonely in the wild. How can you start a fire without any modern instruments? That is a very tricky problem.
I wonder if some of it was by accident. There's been a weather event, lightning strike, set something on fire, and they got surprised by it, frightened by it, and then learned to tame it. There'll be something happened to make it possible.
But if you want to use that to drive evolution, we will need constant fire, constant heat source. So by some point in time when we have a sufficient large brain, then we will start to learn to make fire by our own. But initially, it must make use of some natural environment where there's a constant source of heat. Forest fire will not burn year round, but lava can.
Cyril, our ancestors would have always seen fire happen by accident with lightning or something else. But the trick was to work out how to rub those two sticks together to make fire ourselves. We always knew, or our ancestors always knew, that it would happen naturally. Yeah.
And I suppose it could be reasonable to assume that they left a fire and it lasted for a long time. They knew they could conserve it in coals, and if they fed it every so often, they could keep something going, especially when they went into pit burning and cooking. So there would be some practical things they could do to make it ongoing. I knew we had the larger brain, but it's never come across me before to know that was the cooked food was a link to that. That was sort of new to me today.
Yeah, well, because the brain is a very hungry organ. It consumes a lot of energy.
Yeah, I was
And-
well aware of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and for example, we are looking at our animals today. Most other animals in the wild had to constantly eat to feed their energy needs, or except the pets. The pets, we give them very high energy food, so the pets doesn't need that much of eating. But most animals have to keep on eating all the time.
Mm.
So
The other interesting thing, sorry, you
Eh?
go on, Albert.
no, you got.
The other interesting thing is that we found cooked food more enjoyable than raw food. We wouldn't eat cooked food if we didn't find it enjoyable. The fact that it helped our brain,
You
well,
secondary.
we didn't work that out.
Yeah.
But and of course, I think I mentioned last week there are stories that the first cooked food was probably cooked accidentally.
Yeah.
Yeah, we found that it was
It smells good as well.
yeah.
Well, that's the story with roast pork, isn't it? Someone was trying to save a pig and burnt themselves and licked their fingers, and that's
Oh.
not bad.
Well, no.
Albert, I have a question. It's true that prey animals eat all the time. In other words, herbivores and things like that. But I'm trying to think of a carnivore, a predator animal that eats continuously, because my understanding is that most carnivores eat sporadically or periodically when they catch something.
Mm.
So, and then often they go to sleep for a while they digest. Would it be
Yes.
because there's more value in a protein diet than in a herbaceous diet that they can eat sort of intermittently, as it were?
Yeah, I think so, because obviously the carnivores cannot eat all the time because they have to hunt. And then after hunting, they will have a big meal, and then they will rest for a long time before the next successful hunt. So obviously, meat will have much more energy than plants.
Which may, I mean, I hadn't thought about, followed this through before, but the vegan diet or vegetarian diet is so popular now. It's sort of, I guess, as I look to the evolution that you're talking about, sort of shows me why maybe the vegan diet, although people find it very beneficial, doesn't, or maybe we have to be more careful with a vegan diet, something like that.
Yeah, I saw a story on this the other day. A couple starting a family. They were vegans. They were, well, I presume healthy, but they had a daughter, and taking her to baby health centre and that, they said, look, she needs protein, she needs this, that and the other. They decided not to give it to her. They thought, no, she'll be all right. She ended up being hospitalised, and she's now not the full bottle. She's retarded, unfortunately.
Oh,
So
goodness.
that was really sad, and the parents have had charges against them, and not a jail sentence. I think that's postponed, but they've got a lot of work then to look after their child, who I presume they love. I don't think that was the question. It was the belief system that let them down.
Remember that most humans are in fact vegetarians with only a tiny bit of meat in their diets. Most humans are not Western. Most humans live in an Asian country and their main intake of food is actually vegetables. And lentils are the main source of all rice.
That's because of the unavailability of meat.
Yeah,
it's also because, and they live quite perfectly well, probably to a longer life than most Westerners.
Yeah, But
what
Belwy,
you
they're
were saying,
they're
Cyril.
getting some meat, and it's not eating a lot of meat.
Well, they're not
It's-
always getting meat. They're using soy products and various other things. You're a Westerner and you look through Western eyes, but most of the
Yeah.
world are not Westerners and they're not looking through Western eyes.
Well,
Cyril, if I can get back to what you were saying, I have a similar story. My niece-in-law, if I can use that term, her parents were typical 1960s hippies. They were vegetarians, and she was born in the 70s, and she was a vegetarian. When she was pregnant for the first time, her gynecologist told her that she really needed more protein and that she should eat some meat, which she did. And she so loved the taste of the meat that she completely abandoned her vegetarian principles overnight.
Yeah.
well,
I could never become vegetarian totally or vegan or that.
but
No.
there are a lot of plant proteins, especially the beans and so forth. So if you are like monkeys only eating the leaves, there's not much protein. But you are eating the fruits and the beans. There's a lot of plant protein which can supplement our body.
Mm.
And Albert, just speaking against what I said before about prey animals, or I guess I'm modifying that slightly, most predators will go for the guts. So
Yep.
once they've killed something, they actually eat the stomach and intestines, which is where all the their victims are generally herbaceous, and so that's another way that predatory animals get a lot of herbaceous nutrients. So I'm sort of talking against myself there.
Yeah,
It's
and the
interesting
muscles
in
are
the-
usually tough as well.
Look, it's interesting. Under the feudal system, the best cuts of meat went to the manor house and were eaten by the lord and lady, and their butlers, maids, etc., got the second best cuts of meat, and the offal went to the peasants. The irony is that today it's exactly the opposite, in that the most expensive meat in the butcher is the offal, mainly because half of the offal is thrown away after an animal is slaughtered.
Which part is
So
the
it's a
osso?
full circle.
Is that the tail?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Which part is the
I missed
osso?
It's a liver, the liver and all that.
Or liver?
Yeah.
Brains,
Just-
tripe, all that sort of thing.
kidneys.
Kidneys.
Yeah. Yeah, steak and kidney, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Or lamb's fry.
The liver has
look.
a lot of iron and protein.
But attitudes change, and say something like lamb shanks, which used to be sold for dog meat way back, now have a high price because they're popular and people have double cooked them, slow cooked them, done this, in restaurants, and they've tried things, and they can be really beautiful, especially if they're casseroled in the winter time and you get all the glutinous stuff out of it.
Now, I must admit, I do love most offal, particularly at a yum cha, Albert. I think you've probably seen me eat chicken feet. And love chicken feet, which are regarded as offal.
Albert, getting back to what this session's about, I wonder if we therefore say that people could not have migrated from Africa until they could carry that fire that was so available to them.
I think so.
Because they wouldn't have had the brain, because you had to have quite a bit of brain to put it onto a canoe, for instance, and get across the Pacific. Or the indigenous people here that came here perhaps 100,000 years ago must have had to cross some water, or else reinvent the fire here.
Or they must be either has the ability to make fire or preserve fire. Obviously, preserving fire is easier than making fire.
Yeah.
There's
But
another
they
theory.
could make fire.
Another theory is, I think I mentioned that last time, is that old people in humans survive much longer compared with animals, because old people not moving, not very energetic, will be a prime candidate to look after the fire seats. So if you have a family, then you have a fire. Making fire is difficult, but keeping a fire is relatively easy. That can be manned by old people, and therefore old people in human society do have a function, and that's why evolved to live much longer beyond the reproductive age.
I don't know that we have much of a function now.
Yeah, you do. You still have to look after your grands.
They've got the internet for knowledge and electricity for fire.
Yep. But
We've invented ourselves out of use.
we are moving forward too quickly. I think our laws and moral system cannot catch up with technology. So that
That's
would be
always the case.
But our own Indigenous people could always make fire from nothing, Albert.
yeah, they still keep
So
that.
they had a brain. They already must have had the big brain.
Yeah, they already
they need the
learned that,
fire
and then we
again.
lost that ability. Most modern human lost that ability, but I think in those days, people making fire would be quite easy. Today, there's still what they call survivors learning to make fire again.
Well, in that video, the presenter asked his audience the question, how many of you have made fire using sticks? And if I had been there, I would have answered yes. I learned it as a scout. I taught my own scouts how to use sticks to make fire. So, but yeah,
But I can't.
you can't. You've tried.
I try. It's too hard.
Oh, yeah.
I can't.
Oh.
You
It depends on the sticks. The sticks have to be very dry.
yeah. I understand that. I have learned. I have watched many videos about how to make fire. First of all, we need a good tinder. Is that called tinder or tinder?
Tinder.
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 We need a good tinder, a very dry, fine materials. So some kind of soft things, small things. And then secondly, we need a stick which is almost straight with a point so that we can concentrate our effort to the tip of it. And then we use friction to create heat. And then that friction, when it's hot enough, will produce soot, the carbon. And then from there onwards, you will start a fire. But it is very tricky. It needs a lot of physical strength to do it.
There's another possibility. A modern match is a piece of wood with phosphorus on the end. Now, did any of our ancestors use natural phosphor to make a fire?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Is there natural
Not
phosphorus
impossible.
available on the Earth's surface?
Well, it would have to be because it's a natural chemical.
That would be interesting, and that means that obviously natural phosphorus will not be available. My little dog want to go down, so I have to let him go out first. Oh.
Yeah, so you wouldn't know whether phosphorus was in different lumps or cracks in the earth here and there and came close to the surface.
Yeah,
Look, it's
and
just
therefore
something
that
that I've
must
thought
be
of, and
trading.
I mean, it's an innocent question. I don't know the answer.
But
Well,
I think that
after you said it, that I'd do a Google search on that
Yeah.
later. Yeah.
I think the that means some kind of trading must happen, because if they are using phosphorus, and not everybody will have access to phosphorus due to geological locations. So this will be goods which will be traded for a long distance. So people will bring their phosphorus from one place to others to sell and in exchange for something else.
Be dangerous carrying it.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
The other thing is they would have learned to keep a fire using sticks and something, because there's a lot of in how widespread is bamboo. I know there's a lot of bamboo in Asia, but how widespread is that bamboos in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it would be that widespread unless it was taken by men from one area to another for a purpose. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I
because
say, phosphorus doesn't occur naturally in nature. It occurs in compounds. I just keep looking everything up that you guys say to find if it's true or not.
Oh, very interesting. Right.
What I was going to say, our own Indigenous people created a whole landscape here that's totally dependent on fire. And the eucalypts are eucalypt leaves are very good for lighting fires. The oil is quite flammable. So, you know, they created a landscape that suited hunting, grazing animals, and, you know, changed the whole nature of the country by it. So they definitely used fire for so long. I often wonder if they evolved here. Maybe humans evolved here.
we
well,
need
not so silly. They could have gone the other way.
Well, the normal theory is that we came originally from Africa.
So far, this is still the theory, because by using our DNA, we can actually trace back. Because of looking at the DNA, and we probably can be just like recently about the coronavirus. We are trying to look at how long ago the coronavirus evolved into infectious to human. This kind of thing that can be traced using DNA.
Getting back to the phosphorus, at what stage was it used in more modern times? In say, well, within the last 500 years, deliberately? I know things when they did the matches with one instance, but did they use it before they had matches?
I think who invented matches? That's a very interesting. Yeah, I don't know where does the match invented. That would be a good question to look into.
Yeah. Look, I'm guessing that I would say about 200 years ago, but
matches will be much longer.
Feeling. Sorry?
I think it will be much longer.
Prior to that, they had the flint, where the flint created the spark and got the fire going.
Yes,
that would have been used, I imagine, for a very long time.
Yeah. So really, it was, when would phosphorus have been used deliberately in, say, more modern type of man, rather than the developing ones?
Okay. Matches is invented by somebody called John Walker in 1826 in Stockton-on-Tees. So I think that must be an Englishman. Is that right?
Yeah, Scots. Yeah, Northern England.
Scottish, part of England. That's right.
Okay, discovered through lucky accident that a stick coated with chemicals burst into flame when scratched across his health at home. He went on to invent the first friction match.
And you said 1826. I said it 200 years ago. I was wrong. It was only 194 years ago.
Almost correct.
Yeah.
We'll send you back to class, Albert.
When did the Chinese come up with gunpowder?
Chinese come much earlier. Let me just do a search
It
and
goes
then
right back, doesn't it, Albert?
yeah.
I think about 1,000 years ago.
Easily, well before it's used in modern time.
Another
Gunpowder.
possibility is making the Stone Age tools and axes, or just shaping stone so they could sharpen and cut. If they ground something, one type of stone on another, they would at times have seen a spark and might have been able to say, "What's this? What can we use it for?"
Well, 850 AD.
Then they had some tinder next to it.
So
As they're cutting their stone.
They could have, Gwen, yes. It could have happened where there was the dry stuff around it and it caught fire. And they jumped back and thought, "Oh, what have I done?"
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, it's
okay,
quite
the
feasible.
gunpowder is invented in AD 850.
It's a long time back, 850, yeah.
Yeah,
Where?
in China.
In China?
Yeah.
So, Albert, the thing there is if they invented the gunpowder then and used it, they must have had spark to, or a limited fire to make it go.
Yeah.
Flint. Fire 800, yeah.
Chinese have always something called a little tubes where you store your fire seeds. When it's needed, you pull out the tube, blow on it, and then you will start a fire.
Ah.
So it's
what was in the tube, Albert?
a little tube with some fire kept inside the tube that they can carry all the time. So they can just pull out the thing inside, blow on it, and it will start a fire.
Okay.
Yeah, that has been with Chinese for a long time. Let me just find out when it is invented and by whom. Let me see.
How did it say in tube that it had to have air getting into it to keep it alive?
Yeah, using a bamboo tube. So block off a little bit, but not every all. Let me just.
So the bamboo would insulate it to keep it going, and the size of it would give some air.
Yeah, let me see.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me see whether I can get an image of it. Okay, now I'm going to share the image so that you can see.
No.
Share screen. This one. Share. Okay, you see.
Oh, yeah, there they are.
Okay.
So it is a bamboo cut in half and some inside, and something is put inside this one so that it's keep on fire. The other part of bamboo have a small hole on there.
Okay.
So
interesting.
Chinese have this thing for a long time, but how long ago I don't know yet. So we have to look at it. Let me find out how long ago. So
amazing.
Well, I suppose if Chinese have it, something like that will also be available in the other part of the world. Do they say when it is invented? No, you haven't.
I think I'm right in saying that
it was
Marco Polo
approximate
who brought
invention
it
time
from
is
China to Europe.
like the approximate invention time is AD 577.
So what does that mean? 85
Yeah, so that will be about 200 years before the gunpowder.
It's before century, after century is 577, year of 577.
Yeah. So inside there are some of the seagrass. After soaking for a while, pounded into fat, into powdery fats, and then mix it with some cotton, and then mix it again and pan again, and then add a little bit of nitrite, sulfur, and the oil from the pine trees, etc., and then make it into a little thing, and then put it inside the bamboo stick, and then once it is started, then it can be used wherever you like by taking it out, blow on it, and then you will start a fire.
Ah, very smart.
It is invented in AD 577, so 577 years, approximate at invention time. So yeah, I think the Chinese had that for quite some time. Interesting, isn't it? I suppose.
Very.
What about Westerns? You must have something similar. What they call what?
Well, no. It's generally believed that Marco Polo brought fire from China to Europe. For years we thought that Marco Polo, inverted commas, discovered China. They had been trading along the Silk Road for thousands and thousands of years, but it was Marco Polo who brought a few things, including gunpowder, including pasta,
Pizza
from China to Italy.
Yeah, pasta, pizza are bought from China into Italy. But again, in terms of pasta, it seems that pasta might actually have invented in the Middle East.
No, what I heard when I was visiting Xinjiang, and the Xinjiang said Marco Polo, the Italians, kind of bring that noodle pasta from here and back on the way back to Europe.
Yeah.
I'll ask you to excuse me, and I'll see you all in the next session.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
For a few minutes.
Okay, sure.
Late because the computer problem.
Albert?
Yep.
In the film, I don't remember the man's name because I wasn't here at the start, but he talked about the large size of those weapons. You know, they were so big compared to his hand.
Yeah.
But he didn't ever answer what the significance of that was.
I think the significance is that these are used as axes to cut down branches in order to start fire.
That's what he thought was the reason for such big things.
Yeah, because such a big thing obviously is to cut something big.
Mm-hmm.
And
big than needed for an animal.
Yeah.
Didn't he also say that we had diminished in size from some of the earlier Homo species?
No. The original Homo species, for example, Homo erectus is much smaller than we are.
4 foot.
The Neanderthals is larger than we are, but the erectus, etc., is much smaller.
Okay.
So at that time, obviously, don't have sufficient energy, therefore their body size is not as large as us.
No.
So whether I don't know what's the relationship of the body size with evolution. Why we settle at this size rather than like the Neanderthals? That would be another interesting question.
But we have to have a lot of protein to keep us going. The larger we are, the more protein we've got to have.
Yeah. And
you can see the Japanese getting taller as they start eating meat.
And so are our modern Chinese as well. The modern Chinese is about 2 to 3 cm long, higher, taller than our ancestor.
And most of the
in Australia, with the first wave of the first lot of people that were born in Australia from the English colonies, they're always bigger than their parents.
Yes, and most generations are bigger than their parents if they access protein.
Yeah, because
but that doesn't mean we're more efficient.
Our food is much more efficient than before. I think that's true. and much more sophisticated as well.
I heard it suggested that the 2000 generation will be the first generation in 200 years where the average is not taller than their parents. And this, of course, goes back to diet.
Maybe a lack of exercise.
It's in the
Yes,
West.
yes, yes,
Sweet.
absolutely.
Because when we are growing up, we move along everything. We don't have lifts. We run up and down 6 stories like nothing. And then there was a time in Hong Kong where water supply is limited to 4 hours every 4 days.
Oh,
And obviously, you are living on the 6th floor. You won't get water. The water pressure is not high enough. So we used to carry water up the stairs in a very limited amount of time, almost running, because you only get 4 hours water supply, and then you need that 4 hours for 4 days. So I remember those days where everybody put everything down just for water for that few hours.
And how high would the buildings be at that time, Albert?
Sorry?
How many stories high would your buildings be?
6. I'm on the
Really?
6th floor. Yeah.
Goodness.
Goodness.
Well, yes, in this day and age, could you imagine our young people having to do that?
Yeah. And at that time, we are running up and down the stairs, carrying as much water as you can in the fastest available time in order to store water.
but
So,
go back a couple of 100 years and there would be no water on tap. All water would have to come from a
Well, it's
natural
like that in
a
the
well
village.
or a creek or whatever.
yeah.
No.
There's many parts of the world that have to go and walk a couple of miles for their water.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
Also,
at the moment, the digging of wells in Africa actually helps a lot. I think we talk about dry dams. We will talk about dry dam later on when we talk about technology that we have invented.
we have grow ups on the drinking the rainwater all the way until we grow up, and we have to walk about 2 to 3 kilos to buy to the big towns.
And there was a time when people have to go and shop for food every week.
Yeah, unlike now, the car just go to the door-to-door delivery. Even the children's going to school, and sitting in the bedrooms, watching the movie and discussing everything. But now at that time, no, we don't have that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in Chinese we have a saying, "A learned man will know whatever happened in the rest of the world." Now we really can know everything anywhere in the world. Eventually, but that's not a good thing. Too much information. Okay, let's finish this one and then we'll see you in China Today.
Okay, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Okay,
Thanks, Albert.
The Zoom's number still the same, isn't it?
yes, do the same.
Because I have a half an hour, more than half an hour. I couldn't get in,
Oh,
so I hope I can go.
let me see, but I can't start 2 at the same time. I must finish
It's the
this one.
last one today. This is it.
Yep,
Yeah,
and
yes.
then
Yes.
we have 2
One-
weeks holiday and then we'll start again.
Good.
Okay, then
Okay.
for China Today, sorry, for Big History, we will
Big
see you
History.
two weeks later, but we will see the rest in China Today.
Okay,
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
bye.